Okay, let me see if I got this correct. We got Nexus events, we got anchor beings, we got canon events, we got like absolute points or whatever. The concept of the multiverse doesn't make sense, but it does if you just follow what they're telling you. Okay, so let's get to this. Let's get to it. So this was actually something that was in meme form that was sent to us multiple times, and people were like, look at this. It's really hard to understand this. Why are they making it so complex? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about all these multiverse concepts. So let's start with Nexus events. What is a Nexus event? Well, if you watched Loki, Nexus events are points in a timeline that cause a divergence and for the timeline to split into another timeline. These events also lead to Nexus beings, which they talk about, which were never addressed in Loki, but guess what? They are addressed in Deadpool and Wolverine, as a Nexus being is literally an anchor being. So anchor being and Nexus events and Nexus beings are all more or less from the same exact point, and they change the timeline, and they can all be relatively the same. Just what's happening is different terminology, aka Nexus being and anchor being. Next, let's talk about the absolute point in Marvel's What If. What is an absolute point? Well, if you watched What If, essentially it's a moment in time where an event cannot be undone. It needs to happen in that universe, and you cannot undo it. If you try, it's going to happen regardless. It's kind of like, think of it like Final Destination. They think they're avoiding their death, but their death is inevitable because it's meant to happen. So does this sound like a canon event from Spider-Man? It's just that Sony's doing this, not Marvel, so that's technically not really something that belongs here, but it can kind of belong here. They're more or less the same, they're just framed differently by each studio. Every Spider-Man has their canon event, just like an absolute point in Marvel. And we kind of saw that as well play out in Deadpool and Wolverine to a degree. So wow, will you look at that? I just explained all 5 of these things in literally less than 2 minutes to you guys. Not confusing at all when you think about the fact that more or less 3 of these all boil down to be the same thing with some crossover and overlapping. So it's a pretty simple thing to understand. There's really no confusion here. And another way to think of this is think of it as every multiverse and universe has their own certain way to explain it. Just like the Illuminati world, Earth 838 found the MCU to be 616. But 616 is the comics, from the perspective of that universe and Discovery. So just because it's different, it doesn't mean that it's completely changing the entire concept. It's just that there's different words and phrases that they're using to describe all these events, such as a canon event, which also kind of relates to an absolute point. And a Nexus event kind of relates to other events, and absolute point or absolute beings, well, absolute beings are also Nexus beings. So there you go. It's kind of simple. Just don't overthink it, and then it really becomes easy to understand.